Pokemon has come a long way since its humble beginnings, shaping the landscape of gaming with every new generation. From the very first 151 creatures to hidden glitches that became legends, the original games laid the groundwork for a worldwide phenomenon. Let's dive into the era that started it all, where simple mechanics and pixel art sparked a global obsession like no other. Generation 1, Red/Blue era. This is where the entire Pokemon phenomenon started, and it's wild how much was packed into such a simple-looking package. Released in Japan in 1996 as Red and Green, and internationally as Red and Blue in 1998 to 99, Generation 1 introduced the original 151 Pokemon, including the mysterious Mew, which was tucked away as a hidden secret that players could only find through events or glitches. It wasn't just about the Pokemon themselves. This era laid down the blueprint for everything that would follow: turn-based battles with elemental types, collecting gym badges to prove your skill, and climbing through the Elite Four to become champion. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite the Game Boy's severe technical limits, tiny pixel art, and chiptune music that could fit in a tiny chip, the systems underneath were surprisingly complex. Version exclusives forced players to trade over link cables, making the community essential just to catch 'em all. Plus, infamous glitches like Missing No weren't just bugs, they became cultural legends, sparking endless experimentation and fan theories. The nostalgic soundtrack and pixel art aesthetic didn't just age well, they defined the charm and enduring identity of Pokemon. Even today, the echoes of this first generation are everywhere, shaping how we think about these creature collecting adventures. But if you think that's as deep as it gets, wait until you see how Gen 2 supercharged everything with new types, a day-night cycle, and a whole new region to explore. Generation 2, Gold/Silver era. Generation 2 fundamentally transformed Pokemon by building on the original formula while adding features that still resonate today. Released starting in 1999 on the Game Boy Color in Japan, Gold and Silver introduced 100 new Pokemon, including the Dark and Steel types, specifically created to counterbalance the psychic dominance from Generation 1. This was more than just new creatures. The games brought a real-time day-night cycle tied to an internal clock, meaning certain Pokemon only appeared at specific times, adding a new layer of immersion and strategy. They also introduced breeding mechanics, allowing players to hatch eggs and pass moves down generations, plus held items that added complexity to battles. But the real game changer was the expansive dual-region postgame. After conquering Johto's gyms in Elite Four, players could revisit the original Kanto region, now fully playable, doubling the game world. This journey culminated in the mysterious Mount. Silver, where the final boss battle pits you against the silent champion of the very first games, Red himself, offering a meta-narrative climax that ties the two generations together with almost no dialogue but massive emotional weight. Pokemon Crystal later expanded this era by adding animated sprites and giving players the option to choose a female protagonist, a first for the series. The richer soundtrack combined with the Game Boy Color's enhanced visuals made the world feel alive in new ways, setting a standard for immersion. Generation 2 isn't just a sequel, it's a refinement that deepened mechanics, expanded lore, and created a bridge between the old and new. It's the era where Pokemon stopped being just catch 'em all and became about living inside the game world's rhythms and stories. If you thought expanding one region was ambitious, wait until we dive into the Game Boy Advance leap with Generation 3, Ruby/Sapphire era. Abilities didn't just tweak Pokemon battles in Generation 3, they transformed the entire game into a strategic sport. Before this era, battles mostly boiled down to type matchups and move choices, but Hoenn introduced 77 unique passive abilities that each Pokemon could have, from boosting certain moves in rain to shrugging off status effects. Suddenly, a simple water type wasn't just strong against fire, it might have an ability like Swift Swim that doubled its speed in rain, completely changing team composition and battle tempo. This wasn't always obvious visible in the interface since abilities often triggered under specific conditions, but they silently rewrote how you planned your squad. Paired with the arrival of Natures, which subtly tweaked stat growth, these mechanics made Generation 3 into a sleeper hit for competitive fans craving deeper complexity. Hoenn itself was a vibrant tropical playground on the Game Boy Advance, showcasing vast coastal routes, dense forests, volcanoes, and bustling towns. The story centered on an environmental clash between Team Aqua and Team Magma, each forcing legendary Pokemon to reshape land or sea, themes hinting at humanity's impact on nature in a way earlier games never quite touched. Players could also revisit Kanto in the Fire Red and Leaf Green remakes or test their skills against brutal challenges in Emerald's Battle Frontier. But here's the kicker. Generation 3 broke backward compatibility. Due to changes in data structure, you couldn't transfer your Pokemon directly from Generations 1 or 2. Your old team stayed stranded miles away as the series pushed forward with fresh mechanics and creatures. And yeah, let's talk about the water. Heian is famously overloaded with watery routes and mandatory surfing sections. The community immortalized this with the meme, 7.8 over 10, too much water, poking fun at how often you felt like you were paddling rather than adventuring. It's a love-hate thing. Muen is gorgeous, but prepare to spend a lot of time splashing around. At least though, this deep strategic overhaul set the stage for the even bigger mechanical leaps of Generation 4. If you thought Huin's abilities redefined battles, wait until Gen 4 completely reshapes move categories. Generation 4, Diamond/Pearl era. Generation 4 marked Pokemon's jump to the Nintendo DS, introducing the Sinnoh region and sharper graphics that made the world feel more alive. But the real game changer wasn't just the visuals, it was a subtle revolution in the battle system called the Physical Special Move Split. Before, moves were grouped by type, all fire moves counted as special, all fighting moves as physical. Generation 4 tore that rule apart. Each move became physical or special based on how it actually functioned, not just its elemental type. This flew under many players' radar since the interface didn't highlight it. But underneath, it flipped competitive battling on its head. Pokemon limited by their type's move classification could now use their strongest stats better. For example, a bulky fire type with a high attack could finally use physical fire moves like Fire Punch, instead of only special attacks like Flamethrower. Team building strategies grew deeper, rewarding careful move choice and stat investment. The DS also brought the Global Trade System, GTS, letting players trade and battle online worldwide. This was a huge leap from link cables, making Pokemon a truly global multiplayer game. Sinnoh's story dived into cosmic mythology with the legendary trio Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, symbols of time, space, and antimatter. Their tales add a mystical weight, expanding the Pokemon world beyond gym battles and evil teams. However, Sinnoh's design faced criticism for pacing and frustrating backtracking. Players often had to revisit the same routes, sapping momentum and turning exploration into a chore. Platinum tried to fix this with better pacing and story tweaks. The remakes Heart Gold and Soul Silver polished Gen 2 regions with Gen 4 mechanics, rounding out the era. In short, Generation 4 quietly revolutionized battles with its physical special split, an underrated tweak still shaping gameplay, while blending cosmic lore with a richer, more complex world. If Sinnoh's pacing felt rough, wait until we explore the bold reinvention of Generation 5, Generation 5 Black/White era. Generation 5 shook up the Pokemon formula like never before. Set in the fresh Unova region, it featured a whopping 156 brand new Pokemon, the largest single generation roster to date. But here's the twist, until reaching the postgame, you couldn't catch a single classic Pokemon. The entire early journey forced you to build a team from scratch, throwing nostalgia out the window and making players engage deeply with the new designs. Black and White also broke new ground narratively. The story centered around the morally charged Team Plasma and their leader N, who questioned whether humans had the right to own and battle Pokemon at all. This philosophical take was a first for the series, adding an emotional and intellectual weight rarely seen in these games. The narrative didn't just fuel battles, it made you rethink the entire Pokemon world through a more serious lens. Mechanically, Gen 5 introduced seasonal changes that altered environments, plus innovative battle formats like triple battles and rotation battles that mixed up strategy and presentation. These new systems showed Game Freak's willingness to experiment rather than just iterate. Visuals got a sleek upgrade too, with dynamic battle cameras and animations that heightened immersion, matching the story's more cinematic feel. But some players balked at the initial exclusion of older Pokemon, viewing it as a bold but risky alienation of longtime fans. Still, this design choice reinforced Unova's identity as fresh start rather than a rehash. The subsequent Black 2 and White 2 directly follow the original games with continuing storylines and added features like the Pokemon World Tournament, making this the first main series to have numbered sequels instead of a single third version. Community opinions have softened over time, with many now praising the generation's ambitious story, strong audiovisual presentation, and robust competitive battle options. The emotionally complex plotline combined with bold gameplay changes makes Generation 5 stand out as the era where Pokemon aimed not just to entertain, but to provoke thought and innovation. Next up, we'll dive into Generation 6's leap into 3D graphics with the stylish Kalos region, Generation 6 X/Y era. Generation 6 changed Pokemon battles forever with two major additions, the Fairy type and Mega Evolution. Kalos, based on France and debuting on the Nintendo 3DS, was the first mainline game to go fully 3D, giving everything a fresh, stylish look. But the real game changers weren't just visual, they completely shook up competitive play. Before Fairy types, Dragon types dominated with powerful moves and few counters. Fairy types flipped the script, immune to dragon attacks, resistant to fighting in dark, and super effective against all three. This shattered the old meta and made players rethink their teams and tactics. Then there's Mega Evolution. Imagine a battle power-up. Certain Pokemon holding a Mega Stone could transform mid-fight, boosting stats, sometimes changing abilities or typing, and looking way more intimidating. Mega Evolution wasn't just flashy, it made many Pokemon relevant again. Charizard and Gardevoir suddenly had new ways to change the tide of battle. Generation 6 also gave us remakes of Generation 3's Ruby and Sapphire as Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, now with Mega Evolutions and upgraded graphics. That sparked fresh takes on the original Hoenn's too much water criticism, though it looked and played much better this time around. Online features also leveled up. Wonder Trade let players swap Pokemon randomly across the globe, adding chaotic fun. The player search system made battling and trading smoother, blending social features right into gameplay. Not everything won praise. X and Y were criticized for being easier than past games. With generous experience share and plentiful healing items, grinding was less of a grind. Some welcomed the accessibility, while others missed tougher battles and resource management. Here's the thing. Generation 6 balanced big innovations with debates about difficulty. Mega Evolution's spectacle plus Fairy types balance shook the competitive scene, while Kalos' charm and new social features felt fresh. But if you prefer more challenge, the next generation turns up the heat in surprising ways. Generation 7, Sun/Moon Era. Generation 7 shook things up hard by abandoning the classic gym formula fans had known for over 20 years. Instead of gyms, you had island trials that mixed cultural flavor with gameplay variety. Puzzles, mini-games, and battles against massive totem Pokemon all felt like authentic local rites of passage rather than a checklist of badges. This change wasn't just cosmetic, it embedded progression into Alola's tropical traditions, making the region feel alive and unique in a way the series hadn't quite done before. Alola itself was a breath of fresh air, inspired by Hawaii, with lush islands and sun-soaked beaches setting a warmer tone. But the biggest mechanical twist was the introduction of Alolan forms, regional variants that gave classic Pokemon new typings, designs, and sometimes completely flipped their strengths and weaknesses. Imagine a Fire-type Vulpix turned Ice-type. Suddenly your battle strategy had to adapt to these unexpected newcomers. Player battles also got a flashy upgrade with Z-moves, powerful single-use attacks unleashed by equipping Z-crystals. These moves added an epic climax to fights, letting you pull off a jaw-dropping finish that felt like a reward for careful setup. Yet these weren't just flashy tricks. Smart use of Z-moves could turn the tide in competitive battles, making fights more dynamic. Sun and Moon doubled down on character and story, weaving a narrative that explored identity and environment with rivals, Team Skull, and the mysterious Ultra Beasts adding depth and charm. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon expanded on this, offering new storylines and more endgame content like the Ultra Warp Ride, satisfying players hungry for more world building and challenge. Then there were Pokemon Let's Go, Pikachu, and Eevee, which took a completely different approach. Designed as a bridge for Pokemon Go fans, they simplified catching mechanics and shifted battles away from traditional wild encounters. This accessibility won over newcomers but sparked debate about whether these titles counted as core games or spin-offs, especially given their technical compromises and lighter complexity. All told, Generation 7 represents a warm, experimental era, mixing nostalgia, narrative richness, and unexpected mechanics. It's a generation that dared to change the formula while still wrapping its arms around longtime fans, and if you think that was a big change, wait until we get to Generation 8 with its home console leap. Generation 8, Sword/Shield era. Generation 8 marked a huge leap for Pokemon, being the very first mainline entries on the Nintendo Switch with the brand new Galar region and console-level graphics. The games introduced Dynamax and Gigantamax, mechanics where Pokemon grow to gigantic sizes with incredible power boosts. That sounds flashy, but here's the kicker. Both Dynamax and Gigantamax effects last only temporarily during battles. Gigantamax does change a Pokemon's appearance and available moves, but only for that battle's duration, reshaping how multiplayer raid battles work without permanent form changes. Speaking of raids, this era gave us the Wild Area, a sprawling semi-open world hub with roaming Pokemon, dynamic weather, and cooperative max raid battles that got players teaming up like never before. Rather than classic linear routes, the Wild Area felt like a cautious step toward fully open-world design, blending exploration with social play, and it wasn't a one-and-done deal. The Expansion Pass DLC added new story zones, legendary Pokemon, and even multi-stage Dynamax adventures, evolving the raid experience. Then there's Pokemon Legends. Arceus, a standout sub-entry that reimagines Sinnoh's ancient past with semi-open world exploration and a research-focused catching system. Its emphasis on hunting, observation, and terrain navigation pushed the series toward more ambitious, open gameplay. But here's where it gets weird. The community is seriously split. Many celebrated the innovations, finally bringing console-quality visuals, social raids, and exploration that felt fresh. Yet others slammed the games for the notorious Dexit controversy, cutting a huge chunk of older Pokemon from the roster, and criticized what they saw as simplified progression and underwhelming graphics compared to other Switch titles. It's like the series was trying to push forward while holding back at the same time. Still, Dynamax and cooperative raid battles reshaped Pokemon's multiplayer, making social gameplay a core part of the experience for the first time. The wild area might not be a full open world by modern standards, but it's the most ambitious step yet, one that paved the way for the even larger, fully open worlds in the next generation. If you thought that was a big shift, wait until we get into Generation 9's full open world overhaul. Generation 9, Scarlet/Violet era. Generation 9 is the moment Pokemon finally embraces a fully open world experience. Unlike the segmented hubs of Generation 8's wild area, Scarlet and Violet drop players into one contiguous sprawling region inspired by the Iberian Peninsula, where exploration feels genuinely freeform. You're not railroaded through gyms in a set order, multiple story paths run in parallel, and how you want to approach challenges is entirely up to you. This non-linear structure makes the world feel alive and unpredictable in a way Pokemon has never quite achieved before. But open world freedom isn't the only big innovation here. Enter Terastallization, a new battle mechanic where any Pokemon can temporarily crystallize and change its type. Suddenly, strategies become far less predictable. A Charizard that can turn into a rock type or a Pikachu that switches to fighting mid-fight completely rewrites what you thought you knew about type matchups. It adds strategic depth and surprise that transforms traditional battle planning into something far more dynamic and tactical. This generation also brings a huge wave of new creatures, 120 Pokemon total, plus extra ones introduced via staggered DLC expansions like the Teal Mask and the Indigo Disc. That expansion model is controversial. On one hand, it keeps the experience fresh over time. On the other, it fragments access to content in ways some fans aren't thrilled about. Of course, none of this would matter if the game didn't run smoothly. Unfortunately, launch was marred by notable technical issues. Frame drops, pop-in, and odd graphical glitches making parts of the ambitious open world feel rough around the edges. Players expected a next-level evolution for the series, but the rough performance did drag down the initial excitement. Community reaction captures that tension clearly. There's real enthusiasm for this bold leap towards sprawling freedom, and the fresh Terastal mechanics, exciting unpredictability. Yet there's also frustration over the rough launch quality and concern about monetization choices tied to DLC spread out over months. It's the culmination of Pokemon's evolution into an open-world RPG, but also a reminder that pushing a beloved franchise into new territory is never without bumps. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.